Welcome to In the Spotlight. I'm Eric Townell. The Albany Symphony Orchestra is coming up to its 90th anniversary and has become one of the greatest orchestras in the country, according to American Record Guide. Part of the reason for its success is the gentleman who joins us in the spotlight today. It's music director David Allen Miller. Mr. Miller, thank you so much for coming out today.
Hi, Eric. It's great to be with you.
So it's wonderful to talk to such an innovative and orchestra, that is really doing interesting things with the music.
Well, thank you very much. We love to really meld the new and the old, and a lot of emphasis on emerging and young composers always.
That's an interesting balance for orchestras to strike, how to keep their long-term subscriber audience while striking into new territory.
Right. We try not to play too much Tchaikovsky because we don't want to alienate our audience too much. But we do love it nonetheless.
Right.
I've actually felt for many years like the balance is entirely wrong, frankly. That since we are orchestras of 2000 whatever, that just like in Mozart's time, his orchestra, his performances, his concerts were always featuring the latest thing, and occasionally they take a look at a great Handel masterwork of an earlier era or a Bach oratorio. But I'm really committed to the idea that we need to be fostering music of our own time. So in our programming, it tends to be pretty much 50-50. I mean, we play all the great works, as you say, Beethoven and Mozart and Tchaikovsky, but we really feel a commitment to the music of our time, and we love to do that. And I think our public really embraces that idea now as well.
That's very fortunate in the capital region to have such an innovative group like that, well supported.
It actually, I've been there almost 30 years, 28 years, and it actually preceded me. And that when I auditioned for the job and was offered the job, the orchestra already had a reputation as this kind of vanguard institution, really championing the music of our time, and particularly American music.
Right, fantastic. And so does it take a special kind of advocacy or a special kind of preparation on the part of your board, and how do you get people enlisted to be?
Well, I think it's just like old music. It has a lot to do with taste and presentation. And I guess, to be very honest, with balance. That if you go too much in one direction or the other, then you lose the sense of balance. But I think, just as the only difference to me between new music and old music is that history allows us the luxury of shedding all the less than top 0.001% of creative arts of those earlier generations. So what we're hearing today when we hear works of the past, particularly the distant past, is we're hearing the few surviving works from an era in which there were just almost an infinite number of composers creating music for church, for chorus, for orchestra, for whatever, and 99.9% of that has been shed. We're just getting the creme de la creme. So I always have people say to me, well, do you have a different standard for new music than old music? And I say, of course I do, because with new music, everything we're doing is kind of a chance. And obviously, on the one hand, that's very true, and so I don't expect every new piece we commission or perform to be at the level of Beethoven or Brahms. That would be kind of foolhardy. But on the other hand, I would say that we, the administrators, the artistic heads of institutions, our taste really matters. So I'm very careful to pick my composers really strategically, and when I find a composer I feel has a really important or beautiful or particularly compelling voice that speaks to the public, we have that composer come back over and over and over again. Because I think that just as with everything, there's good and there's bad and there's mediocre, and I'm trying to find music that I feel at least is really the strongest music being written today.
Now, does it influence who you hire for your orchestra as well?
In terms of the musicians, you mean?
Yes.
I wouldn't say it matters. In a way, it self-selects. People who really are musicians, I think by virtue of just having been exposed to this rich diet of fascinating new composers, living composers, and not only up and coming, but John Corigliano and David Tredici and Joe Tower and kind of all the great John Harbison, Christopher Rouse, all the pantheon of living great American composers come visit us regularly, and so we have all these interactions with them. But as well as all sorts of emerging and middle career composers, etc. But our musicians really have come to love that aspect of the job, and I think in a way, and I really believe this, I know it from myself in terms of interpretation, that doing things that are fresh out of the box, working on a brand new piece and having to assimilate it and understand it and talk to the composer and figure it out, it just enriches my ability to interpret dead guys so much better. So I find that, and actually it started actually when I was connected to the New York Youth Symphony. My very first job, I was a graduate student at Juilliard doing a master's in conducting, and I got the job as the conductor of the New York Youth Symphony, which is the big orchestra in town there. It plays 3 concerts every year at Carnegie Hall. And I instituted a young composer series called First Music, which still goes on today. On every one of their concerts, they do an 8-minute piece by a young American composer, usually still in conservatory or college or graduate school. And I found we would work over 10 weeks with the youth orchestra with these new pieces to prepare each of our 3 concerts. And I found myself, I would spend so much time talking to the composer and asking questions and being able to go back from week to week and adjust things, that I began to find myself talking to dead composers. I was talking to Shostakovich, and my wife was my then girlfriend, now wife, was very worried about me because I would have long conversations with dead composers because my relationship with living composers so informed the way I thought about music. So our musicians, I think like me, are very attuned to living composers, and I think a lot of musicians come and audition for our orchestra because they know we do a lot of recording, a lot of commissioning, and that attracts them. And certainly someone who hates new music would have a rough time in our orchestra because we do so much of it.
Mm-hmm. Now, if somebody wants to follow the Albany Symphony by means of your recordings, what can you recommend to them?
In terms of specific recordings?
Yeah, that have turned out well, that you're proud of. Say somebody's learning about Albany Symphony today for the first time.
Well, one of our favorites is the one for which we won a Grammy. About 5 years ago, we recorded 2 beautiful pieces by John Corigliano, who's one of our great elder statesmen in American music, and also particularly celebrated because he's had a successful career in film music, even though he never meant to go that direction, as well as symphonic. So he wrote the music to The Red Violin and to Altered States, if people are old enough to remember that movie. So we did a recording of his percussion concerto, a piece called Conjurer, which was written for the great Dame Evelyn Glennie, who's this amazing Scottish percussionist who happens to be profoundly deaf and tours the world as a percussion soloist. And so we didn't do the premiere of it, but I had done the second set of performances in Pittsburgh, and I was so moved by the piece that I asked if we could do it here and record it. So we made a recording of it for Naxos. There's also a beautiful wordless vocal piece that Hila Klickman does on that disc called Vocalese. And so those 2 pieces are on the disc, and we actually won a Grammy for in Best Instrumental Classical with Dame Evelyn for that performance.
Congratulations.
Very powerful piece. So there's that piece. There's a lot of really beautiful Michael Chorkey. We've done a lot of his music. And we have a great disc of a cello concerto and a piano concerto. The piano concerto is called 3 Manhattan Bridges. And the cello concerto is called Winter's Tale. And then we have a lot of discs in the pipeline. A new disc of Joe Tower coming out, another Chorkey disc, a Derek Bermel disc. But if you just go to Amazon or go to the Albany Symphony website, you can scroll down and see all of our discs. There are a lot. Every year we try to put out about two discs each year.
That's quite a lot for it. And Albany Symphony, as far as orchestras go, there are tiers of orchestras.
There are.
Some of the larger budget ones being so-called near the top, but for these projects are ambitious for small.
They are not only ambitious, they are expensive. They're ambitious and expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting, at least from my perspective, conducting a relatively small budget regional orchestra in Albany, it's not a big, just about $2.5 million. The scheme of orchestras is really tiny, and those major orchestras can be $80-100 million in budget. So many times our size, 40-50 times our size in terms of budget. But we really, because of our interest in living music and because of what composers were telling us, that the most valuable thing for them is for other orchestras to hear their music, because that's the only way they'll program the pieces and to hear it at a very high level, and for people in the world to hear their music. We really made a commitment about 10 years ago, even as recording generally was really transforming and changing and becoming harder to figure out. Orchestral recording was never profitable. So we never had to worry because we never made any money on recordings, even back in the day when lots of recordings were made. So it was never a matter of suddenly we weren't getting this income stream. But it is harder to make recordings now more expensive. But we've really felt that that's a great service to the composers and just getting those works out. And the actual disc, we do still sell those, but those aren't what's really selling. It's online, it's Spotify, and all that. So,
I see. Now, do you stream your concerts as well? Are they?
We do not generally, but we'd love to be able to do that. It's something that we need to work toward.
So many orchestras do that now, but really, the live experience is what you do.
And the live experience, as living in a great old northeastern city of Rochester, in Albany, and for anybody who doesn't know the Capital Region that well, the Capital Region is so fascinating because it's Albany, Schenectady, Troy, and then very close, 30 minutes up the road, Saratoga. And we think of all those cities, those beautiful small cities, as the Capital Region. And in that region, we have such great concert venues. It's just, we have such a bounty of concert venues. The most famous, and justifiably, is the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall, which is from 1875 in the little town of Troy across the river from Albany. It was a bank, it was the Troy Bank. And the founding fathers, I guess, of the bank decided that they wanted a concert hall. So the first 3 floors were a bank, and then above that, it went up essentially 7 stories. It was this gorgeous 1,200-seat concert hall, and really one of the great acoustics of the world. In fact, when George Sell used to tour through the Northeast with the Cleveland Orchestra, he would always insist that the orchestra stop in Troy and play a concert there because he wanted the Cleveland Orchestra musicians to hear the acoustic of the hall. So we're very proud of that hall. There's a great hall up in Saratoga at Sandkel Hall at Stonewall College, and we have a beautiful big venue in Albany, the Palace Theater, and lots of other really interesting small venues and more on the way being developed. So there's lots and lots of great places to make music.
And do you record then in Troy, or where?
We mainly record in Troy, and I should mention the other place we play. Every year, we do essentially, unlike the major orchestras, which do a set of concerts a week, we do a concert or a set of concerts essentially once a month during the regular season. And that culminates in late May, early June with a big American Music Festival. That's like a 5-day event, and it's actually turned into a big 5-day event, plus the following weekend, a big regional concert tour of outdoor free concerts. But that we tend to do all over Troy. It's kind of, the whole festival tends to mainly be in Troy, although the free concert tours go beyond the reaches of Troy and even sometimes above the reaches, beyond the reaches of the capital region. But there's a beautiful, fairly new concert hall right up the hill from the Troy Music Hall at RPI. It's called MPAC, Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center at RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic. And that's another gorgeous 1,200-seat hall. So I always feel a little bit embarrassed. It's like, other cities, they have one municipal auditorium that's not so great. And even in the little town of Troy, we have 2 of the great 1,200-seat concert halls 4 blocks away from each other. It's kind of weird. It's almost too much bounty.
And where do your players come from? Are they local?
They really come from far and wide. When I took over the orchestra, as I said, almost 3 decades ago, there were a lot of commuters, but probably, 60% of the orchestra came from the larger capital region. And at that time, one time back in 1960, it had been an amateur orchestra, then it had become semi-professional, and then it had become fully professional. And so a lot of state workers and public school teachers. But as the orchestra has evolved and developed, and as the repertoire we play has gotten harder and harder, and as people have aged out of the orchestra, people have retired and passed on, because all of our auditions are done blind and they're all nationally advertised, almost without fail, when we have an opening, which is auditioned behind a screen, so we, the panel, can never see who's auditioning.
Right.
We select these amazing kids, young musicians who have just graduated from Juilliard or Manhattan or Eastman or Mattis or New England Conservatory. So we have a real preponderance now of fabulous young emerging players who want to be in the orchestra. They want the work, and they come in for the week, play the concert, and then go out. In fact, we even had at one time, this was fairly early in my tenure, we had first trombone auditions. And there was one amazing competitor behind the screen. I was imagining some big, German guy, and out from behind the screen stepped this very delicate little Japanese lady, Megumi Kanda, who became our principal trombone, and then went on to play, I think, in the Rochester Philharmonic, and then now has been for many years in the Milwaukee Symphony as principal trombonist. So she would commute from Cleveland. She had been doing graduate work in Cleveland, and she would drive the 10 hours or whatever from Cleveland to play for the week with us and stay with our principal clarinetist, who was a wonderful mothering figure, and then she would drive back to Cleveland. So we've had people come from far and wide. We have a lot of people come from Montreal, but it's great because there's so many brilliant players around in our great Northeast that we never lack for good players.
That's phenomenal. They've got a commitment on their part too.
Yeah, it's a wonderful group and a wonderful esprit. I think partly the new music, we all have to solve these challenging problems, whether they be rhythmical or just figuring out how the piece works, because it's not a piece that we've all played 100 times. There's a sort of really positive esprit that exists. And when people come and sub at our orchestra, they invariably comment on what a wonderfully friendly orchestra it is. So a really joyful group of people.
Well, I think that comes through even on your website, and we've mentioned the website twice now, but we should say what it is in case people want to.
Yes, you should, because if you get the wrong one, you'll go to Albany, Georgia.
Yeah.
And that's a very long commute.
Don't want to do that.
So if you're in New York State, not that there's anything wrong with Georgia, but it's just it's a bit further afield.
Yeah.
It's albanysymphony.com.
.com.
So Georgia's.org. They got there first, I guess, but we got .com. So www.albanysymphony.com.
AlbanySymphony.com. Well, when I went there, I noticed there's a lot of programming that's very responsive to New York State history and the culture here. And some of those have been very successful projects.
They have. We've had a wonderful time doing that. And that I think, as I've developed in my position, I've always had a real strong interest in history. I'm from Los Angeles,
Uh-huh.
where, of course, like everywhere, there's history, but it's rather much more hidden. In that, Pueblo Los Angeles and pre-US Los Angeles barely exists anymore. You really have to look hard to see it. So when I came east, I've been in New York City for graduate school and then got back to California and then came out here. When I came to Albany, the thing that struck me first and foremost was how rich the history is. As maybe not compared to France, where it goes another X hundred years later or 1,000 years earlier, but compared to California, the history here is so rich, and this really is such a seat of our nation. In that, Ben Franklin and Alexander Hamilton and George Washington were always coming up to Albany and going down and riding up to Canada through Albany, and I began to just be fascinated by the Battle of Saratoga, which was fought right up the road from us, and all these different really seminal events in our country's history. And I began to think, since we are the orchestra in the city of the capital city of the state of New York, that I'd love to celebrate our heritage through musical creation. So one of the first things I did, I noticed there were these incredible Tiffany interiors all over, particularly Troy, New York, but also Albany. In the late 1890s, Troy was a particularly affluent industrial city, and so they often brought Tiffany in his studio up to design their churches and their schools. And so we created a couple of they were sort of like almost like progressive dinners, but they were bus tours where we went from venue to venue, one Tiffany interior to another, and had a Tiffany scholar describe and explain the importance of the work. And then we commissioned a piece for each of these interiors. The composer would speak, we'd play his or her piece, and we'd get on buses and go to the next interior. And people just love these concerts because they brought us to venues they'd never seen before. They and the music was so connected to the sense of place and time and history. It happened that it came to my attention that 1817 was the year in which the first shovel was dug in Rome, New York for the Erie Canal. And I had this idea to basically take our orchestra and float it down the canal from Albany to Buffalo. Of course, being a Californian, I had no idea it was 330 miles. And I didn't know that you could only go 5 miles an hour. So, but the idea was to stop in different towns. We ended up stopping in 7 different towns. We had embedded young composers in each town. And so each composer created like a 30-minute theater piece, choral piece, dance piece with music in collaboration with a group in that community that somehow told the story of their relationship to the canal. So the week of July 4th, 2017, the 200th anniversary, which happened to be the 300th anniversary of Handel's Water Music that very month, we did this tour of 7 cities from Albany to Buffalo, and we played the water music of Handel, and then we played in each city the world premiere creation that had been made by a composer for that town. And so we had 7 world premieres, really substantial works, and then we played, John Williams and Stars and Stripes and Fireworks, and it was a great success. And so building on that, we also this spring, in the spring of 2019, we developed a similar kind of program, Sing Out New York, which it happened because of the suffrage anniversary, the big anniversary in 2020 of women's right to vote, the 19th Amendment, and also the Stonewall uprising in Greenwich Village, really kicking off the LGBTQ movement in a very meaningful way. That exact anniversary was June 1969, so 50 years. Using those as kind of bookends, we did a whole festival around social justice movements in New York State, and so pieces about Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass, and a beautiful dance piece about Stonewall, and then also pieces about Justice Kennedy's same-sex ruling, and all sorts of things, social justice history things that we then had different composers transform into music. So about 51 works on the festival and tour, 36 world premieres by 26 composers, 21 events. So really, and the wonderful thing is New York State has been so supportive, both the State Arts Council and the tourism agency, I Love New York, Market New York. So they've really enabled us to do really daring and wonderfully inventive things.
That's phenomenal. Now, have other orchestras contacted you to find out how it's done?
Well, not actually about these projects, which is interesting, but we did a spirituals project. I was thinking about that because I know you've done a great deal with the spirituals as well. I have been struck that there weren't that many solo, really compelling arrangements of spirituals for solo voice with orchestra that I found. And so I commissioned about 20 of my favorite composers of all different colors, religions, backgrounds, gender, etc., to write new versions of traditional spirituals. They kept the melody and beautiful pieces.
Wow.
And I did get a lot of calls from people about that project because other conductors were looking for for similar programming. But I haven't been. No one said, "How do you do a water music type thing?" But I really feel like it's a great way to connect to community, because all these projects that we're developing them in concert, in collaboration with community groups, with choruses, with schools, with dance programs, with theater companies. And it's a really great way to embed ourselves in the community in a way that orchestras sometimes aren't embedded. And also it's just, it's a great way to find a larger new set of audiences.
Isn't that great? No, there are other artists involved, is that right? Graphic artists and fine artists as well? Or?
Well, there have been. I mean, for example, when we did these free outdoor concerts on the Erie Canal, we basically, and also with Singing Out Justice, we created these incredible sort of big street fair events. So like we went to Baldwinsville, the town of Baldwinsville, created an arts fest with visual artists. They never had one, an all-day arts festival, or all-weekend arts festival, and that continued on after Water Music. So we are kind of seeding different arts projects. But and in Troy, where the main festival occurs, we've got a lot of really interesting events. We have beer tastings linked to new music readings. We had an incredible suffragist. It happened to be a vegan, the first ever in world history, vegan suffragist brunch. I wanted to do a suffragist picnic, and Symphony Anthony showed up, and Frederick Douglass, and different performing artists sang and played. But it happened that there was a vegan festival going on in Troy at the same time, so we combined the two. So it was a real 19th century vegan suffragist festival. So who knows what kind of crazy things come out when you put your heads together.
We should throw that one here, because we're talking today, for those who haven't seen it yet, we're at the Women's Rights National Historical Park in Seneca Falls, which is a wonderful venue. And so thank you very much for that.
Yes, sure.
So now, if people are looking for ways to build this into their children's lives, are there educational programs at the Albany Symphony?
There are many. We've had a long time family concert series that we do, which are just wonderful 50-minute, very fun, exciting, lively programs. We have a number of school programs and projects. In fact, we're really immersed in the schools of the capital region. It's challenging because there's so many different small cities, that there's so many different school districts.
Right.
So we run a beautiful kind of an adopt a school program in three really big districts, in Albany, Troy, and Avon Park. And that's bringing in the third grade or second grade, whenever that district starts instrument programs. The previous year, we bring in 8 pairs of our musicians. They do a whole sort of show and tell, and I come in and we talk about the instruments. So the idea is really to get them excited about playing an instrument in the band or orchestra. And then we have a program that I'm very proud of, a literacy through songwriting program for young middle school students. And that's really where we have a resident teaching composer artist who comes and spends a whole year working with a group of school kids in the 6th or 7th grade.
Fantastic.
And this year we have this brilliant, she's Puerto Rican-born composer, one of our water music composers, actually, Angelica Negron, who lives in New York City. And she's made 7 or 8 trips up and is working with a group of kids on instrument building. She makes her own kind of wild electronic instruments, and she actually created a water synth for the water music project, where she put her hands into these different vats of water to make different pitches, which seemed very terrifying to me because but she also is known to play vegetables. She'll stick nodes into, and so she's working with these kids on their creating instruments. And then next season, on our December concert, we will do our culminating work that she's creating with the kids. So we do a lot of those kinds of projects where we bring a composer into a classroom setting, and he or she works over a period of months or a year, and then we complete that with a big performance with the orchestra.
Well, that's fascinating. Now, how about the next generation of orchestra goers? For instance, they're millennials and they're just coming to the orchestra.
Yeah, well, what I found, sort of back to your first question, or my first audacious statement about occasionally we play a piece by Tchaikovsky just in case anybody likes Tchaikovsky. What I found, actually interestingly, is that the more millennial audience gravitates very much more to the new and unusual, in that they don't know they're supposed to like Brahms or like Strauss or whatever it may be. I mean, they certainly like it when they hear it, but invariably when we play a concert and it's got something new and audacious on the first half, something warm and yummy on the second half, the older, not without exception, but almost without exception, the more traditional concert goers are happy to hear the Brahms, but the people who haven't really been before or are young and coming up, they're much more interested in the work, the newer piece, because the sound world is actually more similar to the things they know, to whatever they're listening to on the radio, to movies, to TV. And so I actually believe that this new art thing is the way to really connect to new audiences. And the beautiful thing I always say, because we do so much with sort of sense of place commissioning, is that it's very hard to get Beethoven to write a piece about the Adirondacks. It's like Beethoven is not available, it's too expensive, and it's not really interested in writing about the Adirondacks. I mean, you can play the Pastoral Symphony, but I can call up Viet Quang or Ben Wallace or Lauren Loyacono and say, will you write a piece about the Adirondacks? And they'll go to the Adirondacks and write a piece that's very site-specific. And so there's a real power to that if we're telling stories about our own time and our own place and our own heritage and history, a living composer can write to suit, whereas a dead composer can't. So we really, we feel that the festival is one of these great examples. This annual festival that happens at the end of May, June every year is really one of these ways to really get people to embrace new art, because it's always linked to things that they care about: social justice issues, the Erie Canal, industrial history. We're working on a project about celebrating the Empire Trail, this incredible trail system that's going to be completed in 2020, 750 miles of trail that Governor Cuomo has allocated money in the budget for. And doing, one of the things we're maybe going to try to do is take the whole orchestra and obviously pay them the usual amount, but have them play solo pieces, all 80 of them in different places on the trail, and you have to go, find those events. So different ways to kind of challenge audiences to believe that what we do is fresh and isn't just a museum culture, but it's really a work in progress.
And finding the audiences where they are and not necessarily expecting them to come to the concert hall every time.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's a really exciting development. I think all of us in the arts have to do that. I've been reading about museums and how they've really had to reinvent themselves, because the static activity of just going and looking at a painting is much harder to sell now than it was 70, 80, 100 years ago.
So now, if people are looking for a way to volunteer or to donate, is this easy at the Albany?
Volunteer, we love that. Our volunteer organization, Vanguard, is this fantastic group, but they've been doing this for a long time. They would love new members to join.
What do they do?
Well, you can just call us up at the office. Sophie Moss is probably the person you want to talk to on the staff, or any of our wonderful staff members if you're interested in volunteering, if you're interested in donating, or our wonderful executive director, Anna Kuwabara. Just call the Symphony, or we'd love to, we try to be very responsive. Our marketing director, Justin Cook, is wonderful. Whenever anybody sends an email or posts something on the Facebook page, or, we always want to respond to you, our public. So we welcome anybody who wants to participate, who wants to volunteer, who wants to contribute, who wants to know more about the programs, all of that. We really welcome it. And what was wonderful about the Water Music Erie Canal trip was, we really had we've gone down to Carnegie Hall twice for a festival, Springfield Music Festival, and we went down to the Kennedy Center last year for a big music festival there. But other than that, we don't really tour, because, as you know, it's so expensive for orchestras, particularly smaller budget orchestras, to tour. But what was so wonderful about the Erie Canal trip was we really made all sorts of friends along the canal in different communities. And we've kind of welcomed them and kept in touch with them, and wonderful people in Little Falls, which is about an hour away from us, so kind of out of our usual purview, and in Amsterdam, and even in Rochester. We were in Brockport, and we had Lockport and Baldwinsville. So especially things like the festival, you may not want to make the trip from Rochester because it's 3.5 hours or whatever it may be, but to make the trip to come here, 2 days of intensive, fascinating new works, to be able to hear more than 50 works in a couple of days, might be worth it to just come out to make a celebratory weekend. Troy, where most of the festival has become the hipster capital of North America. They say it's the new Brooklyn, but they say that about every town that's coming up. But a nice chance to sample all the great restaurants and all the great bars and clubs, and to hear some really incredible music is always a treat. So looking out for that American Music Festival, because that's a really intense period when you can get a huge dose of what we do in a very short time.
That's all very, very exciting. So thank you so much for coming in the spotlight and telling us all about it today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to talk in the long form. I really appreciate it.
Maestro David Allen Miller is the music director of the Albany Symphony Orchestra, and then that website is www.albanysymphony.com. Thank you for joining us in the Spotlight. We'll see you next time.
In the Spotlight is a production of Penfield Television with sponsorship from Nokan & Associates, a private wealth advisory practice of Ameriprise Financial Advisors. If you enjoy this program, please find us on Facebook, like and share the program, and find our full playlist on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.